Okay, if everybody could have a seat, we're going to go ahead and get started. We only have an hour with Ms. Francis before we start the Career and Networking Fair, which is happening at 4:30, so I want to allow time. There's not a large enough audience in here that we have to exclude questions, so we're going to be open to taking questions that are either lead-offs of what is discussed here or extensions of new topics that you want to know about. She may not have knowledge about the grassy knoll and things like that to great detail, but we'll start with what we have here. My name is Elizabeth Kuntz. I'm an assistant professor in English, and I feel silly introducing without standing up. And so before we go on, I'm here to introduce our speaker today, who is Ms. Kelly Francis. She is a 2001 alumna of Ohio University, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in English. After college, Kelly put her knowledge of literature to good use by working at a bookstore until she had an epiphany that she could do a similar job but get paid only slightly better by becoming a librarian. While researching library science graduate programs, Kelly discovered the archives profession. She moved to Boston in 2006 to attend Simmons College, where she received a Master's of Science in Library and Information Science with an archives management concentration. Kelly worked as the assistant digital archivist for textual collections and a processing archivist at the JFK, well, I should say John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum from 2007 to 2017, where she was part of a small team that created and produced content for the library's digital archives. She is currently, just a few months ago, recently employed as an archivist for the Federal Reserve Bank. So we've entitled today's presentation From Bobcat to Archivist, My Career Journey and What It Was Like to Work at the JFK Presidential Library. And the reason for that title, obviously, is because the majority of her time was spent working at the library, but she can entertain questions about the second job as well. And because this is Career Week and we're being plugged into Career Week, we obviously want to include some information about her career journey. How does a person who is from OU get this big name job at this sort of interesting institution that maybe seems for some of us out of reach? Before we begin, I want to thank a few people. I would like to thank Dean Frank, who's not here, the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences, as well as Lisa Cohen and Lori Bauer, who have been instrumental in allowing us this space and helping us to plug into Career Networking Week. And I'd also like to thank our committee members, Dr. Tom Scanlon, Dr. Matthew Stallard, and Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, who I can't see because of the lights. And they're all on the committee here. We have plugged in, Kelly is going to be doing an alumni jobs panel for our majors tomorrow, along with several other illustrious graduates of our program. And so she's here for a double bill. And I would also like to thank Dr. Linda Rice, who has been very supportive of this effort for a number of years on the committee and now is chair. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kelly and get started. Okay, so we have a series of set questions just to kind of have given her a chance to prepare some things to talk about, but that doesn't mean that this has to be the limit. We just wanted to have some structure. So our first question is, how does an English major from OU end up landing the types of prestigious archivist jobs that you've had? And tell us a little bit about your career journey.
Well, when I was an English major, I kind of went in not really knowing what I was going to do, but I thought that English would give me a good foundation for anything that I might want to do, which it did. And after graduation, I worked in a bookstore. I had a revelation that I liked being around books, and so tried to think, what can I do with that? And it never occurred to me that you could become a librarian. They were just there. And I didn't think that it was a possibility. So I went to graduate school. I settled on Boston, Simmons College in Boston, because at the time it had, I think, the second best graduate program for library science, and it also had the archives management concentration, which not many other graduate programs had. There's also only about one accredited school in every state that offers a graduate library science program. So I was fairly limited in my options of where I wanted to go. But the other reason I settled on Boston was because of the concentration of historic institutions, the colleges, the universities, just the opportunity that I figured it could provide me as far as education and potential career opportunities after I graduated. So one of my courses in graduate school required an internship, which is how I ended up at the JFK Library. I went in as an unpaid intern for class credit. While I was there, they offered me a paid internship a few days a week so I could get some processing experience. And then I stayed on as a paid intern until graduation, when somebody was leaving and they offered me the position of a metadata cataloger in the Digital Archives program, which is how I ended up there. So it was basically kind of getting the right placement in a class required program and doing a good enough job that they wanted to keep me on. And I really loved what I did. It's been an invaluable experience for me to be there. But internships also help a lot. And if I didn't have that internship, I would have gotten an internship somewhere else.
Does anyone have any follow-up questions that they'd like to ask? Because we do have a microphone. I have one. One question I had, because I didn't think about this when we were considering questions, was as a young student pursuing an interest in graduate school, what specifically drew you to archival work as a discipline, as a subdiscipline?
Well, I always had a general interest in history, and I took a few kind of extracurricular history classes when I was here that didn't really coincide with my English degree. So I liked history, and I also really kind of enjoy organizing things, and that's a lot of what archives is. It's kind of taking a mess of materials that somebody gives you, and you organize them in a coherent way that they're accessible to people who actually want to use them for research or whatever. So history and organization.
Yes, I'm chair of the history department, and so I'm very interested in having you talk more about, for selfish reasons, obviously, about the advantages of taking history courses for doing this kind of work, or any kind of work. Of course, that would be my argument, that history is a vital discipline, regardless of what you want to do with the rest of your life. It's the key to success. But could you tell us more about the history courses you took here and how they complemented your English major? You called them extracurricular courses, but I was thinking as you said that, because as an undergraduate, I was a double major in history and English, and how well the two disciplines complement one another.
Well, the history class, I took, I think, Intro to Civilization, and but the one that I really remember taking, because I thought it sounded interesting, was History of Espionage. And I love that class, and it kind of, we read a novel, and I learned about the Enigma, and so I think a lot of archivists have a history background. I know Simmons College offers a dual degree program where you can get your history degree in addition to your archives degree at the same time. Every archive has a different collection, so kind of a different specialty. So you can't really specialize in one era of history. You can, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get a job working with those materials. So I think just having a good understanding of history, why history is important, why it's important to preserve it, and why it's important to make it accessible to people in the future.
So I have something that you said made me think of that you were really, really smart in your planning, and that is this: that you chose Boston because you thought you'd have career opportunities there. I'm wondering, how common is that amongst your classmates? Did a lot of them go there because they thought they wanted to stay there? Because I'm thinking for our own students, I would have thought you just pick a library school. I'm not a planner, so I think of a library school and I'll figure out where I want to go next. But how common? That seems like a really great idea. And like, did most of your classmates stay in Boston? And did they go to Simmons specifically because they wanted to be in Boston? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't know if they went specifically because they wanted to stay in Boston. I think a lot of them went for the same reasons that I went, and the current students go for the same reason. It seems like a lot of people want to stay in Boston. It's a great city, but the job market is quite saturated in Boston right now and in the New England area, because Simmons has quite a growing archives program. There's a lot of people who come to the program and then graduate, and then 10 other people are, wanting their same job. So, and they all have the same skills, which is another reason where internship and experience can come in and really kind of put you ahead of the curve. But for graduates, I go where you want and look into your school and the school that you want to go to or that has a good program. I believe Indiana University has a really good kind of digital archives and digitization area, and I think Michigan does too, but certain schools have kind of different specialties, so figure out what you want to do with that, and then once you graduate, be open to where you want to move to, because Wyoming needs archivists, and not everybody wants to go to Wyoming. So you can go to Wyoming for a year or two and get some great experience and then go where you want to go.
Okay, our next question is, how did your experience as both a Bobcat and as an OU English major, we've already covered history, prepare you for your career as an archivist?
Well, being an English major, I had to read a lot and I had to write a lot of papers. I think my 1 quarter, because we were on quarters back then, 1 quarter my senior year, I had to write on average a 7 to 10 page paper every week, in addition to all of the reading that I had to do. So working in the digital archives, my job was to read through a folder and write a brief description about that folder. So in essence, I had to do the same thing of what I did with my papers, which is read an amount of material, kind of synthesize it down into a few main points, and with correct punctuation and grammar, you're representing the library, so you want to make sure everything is accurate. So you have to do some research. So I would have to do research on some of my papers. I did research daily when I worked at the library. Some things that you think you know, you really don't once you start kind of writing about them. You want to make sure everything is accurate. And writing my papers for my English classes, I had to write bibliographies, punctuation. So really like reading, writing, synthesizing, and attention to detail really helped me in my job as an archivist.
Okay, good. We've already talked about history and English. Are there any other OU experiences or classes that you particularly also felt helped you for this career move, or?
Well, I did a few months as a copy editor at the Post, so that also kind of helped me with my editing skills. And briefly after I graduated, I thought I was going to go into publishing, so I was sending resumes out to these publishing houses in New York thinking that they were going to call me. That didn't happen. But no, I mean, I think the basic liberal arts education is really important to have, and that really helped me have a good...
Specifically for this career, but also for many other
For many.
careers. I always plug the liberal arts. Any classes you wish you'd taken?
I think I wish I'd taken more history classes.
Right answer.
That's the right answer. Okay, so we're going to switch now to talking a little bit more about the sort of job duties that you do at JFK. What does an archivist specializing in digital technology do, and what types of tasks and duties did you perform when you were working as a digital archivist at the JFK Presidential Library?
Well, my main responsibility was to read and describe these folders and get them online. So they're all accessible online in the digital archives. If you go to their website, they're there now. So I was responsible for doing that. I also sometimes did photographs and audio recordings. I supervised the scanning by interns of all of the materials. I did preservation work when I needed to. So if something needed to be put into a protective sleeve, I did that. I removed rusty staples. And then, we are lucky enough to have a IT specialist. So any of our IT questions that went along with the digital archives, we just kind of pushed on to him. So it's basically that.
So it's the scanning and then the sort of creating the narrative,
describing
groups of things so that people can access.
Mm-hmm. It was scanning and describing the materials and creating metadata and access points. So you can search on a name, you can search on a subject. All of the documents are OCR, optical character recognition. So you can do keyword searching on documents. So you can kind of hopefully find what you're looking for, even if you aren't sure if it's there. The goal was to make everything accessible to people who couldn't come to do research on site. And one of the most rewarding aspects of doing that was, when you would get a letter from somebody overseas in Europe or a foreign government sometimes, thanking you for the work that you did making all of those materials accessible.
Well, and then it'll be there for perpetuity.
Yeah.
That's one of the really interesting things. What types of materials are typically housed in a presidential library? I mean, you can talk specifically, the next one is about what are the most interesting artifacts there, but like what kinds of things might someone who was visiting your archives or the whole library encounter?
Well, the presidential libraries also tend to have museums, so which is separate from the archives. The museum is mostly artifacts. They'll usually have some documents thrown in on exhibit. And the archives generally has the papers of the president, members of his administration, and anybody kind of related. The JFK Archives also has family papers and, on occasion, friends of the Kennedy family. But for the most part, it's people who worked in his administration. And the Kennedy Libraries actually predates the Presidential Records Act, which was put into action, I think, in 1970-something, 8. It was because of Richard Nixon. So up until that point, presidents weren't required to give their papers to the federal government. After the Presidential Records Act went into effect, it became a requirement. So anything created by the president or members of his administration in the federal government, whatever they do, it's the property of the federal government. But for the Kennedy Library and the previous libraries, we relied on people donating their papers. It wasn't required, or they were going to give them to us.
So it's an interesting narrative of submission and omission.
Yes.
What are some of the most interesting artifacts in your opinion? She has some slides to show us too, but what are some of the most interesting artifacts?
A lot of the correspondence is interesting, and you really have to kind of dig around for that. But one of my favorite ones is a telegram from, and I wish I would have included it, I believe from Harpo Marx, and it was something funny. And I think he sent it on JFK's when he won the presidency. One of the other interesting documents is when JFK was elected president, he had to resign from the Senate. So he had to send a resignation letter resigning from the Senate to Vice President Nixon, who he defeated in the presidential election. So I always thought that was pretty funny. One of my other favorite documents, it's not even a document, and it's not really out on display much, but I do have a slide of it. It's a map of that Burke Marshall, who was the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. He kept this map of voting rights issues that were going on at the time in the South. So, and there were different color-coded pins that he used to indicate what was going on where. So if it was a city that wasn't complying with federal law, if it was a city where they had complaints of people not, being allowed to vote for one reason or another. But it's something that you don't really think that was kept, and it was, and it's there and it's preserved, and it's just really cool to see.
I bet.
Yeah.
Anyone have any follow-up questions before I move on?
All right. I'm a social studies education undergrad, and so I'm a huge history geek. And my question is basically, like, did you appreciate, like, everything that you were learning, or did it ever just kind of get numb and, like, you just lost interest?
I appreciated everything that I learned. My knowledge of the early 60s increased exponentially. Going in, I didn't really know much. I knew there was the Bay of Pigs, and I knew about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I knew that he had been assassinated, and that was pretty much what I knew. So I had to read through all of the documents that are digitized, so I knew what they were talking about, so I could write an accurate description about them. So everything that I read, I tried to, like, really read and appreciate what I was reading and learning about and being able to handle. And that, yeah. But at the same time, you are inputting so much information that a lot of it kind of leaves quickly also. So there's a lot of things that I know fragments of. But at one point I knew a lot more.
But you even said at one point on the phone that you had probably read every document ever written by or about John F. Kennedy. And
A lot,
I was
yeah.
just, as a researcher myself, absolutely sort of fascinated and stunned by the sort of like value of that and what kind of interesting narratives that maybe come out on the sides of all the documents that are sort of like peripheral tales and the kinds of narratives that are yet to be told that you surely know about. So like what would one of those be?
Well, first I think pretty much everything has been written about him that maybe can be written about him. There's at least 1 or 2 new books every year. But I do think that he was very funny and witty. And you can see some of that in the press conferences that he gave, where he jokes and banters with the press, all of which are available to view online through the Digital Archives. And some of this correspondence to his friends, he was just funny, and I don't think people really know that as much as they should. He loved his family, and he loved the water, which I think everybody knows about. He loved sailing, he loved boats. I lost my train of thought. But yeah,
But you say the stuff that can be written about, meaning the stuff that the family would let you write about.
Yeah, the family is still very much around and involved, so maybe not. I would like for more things to be written about the more personal side of him. I think that he had a great personality and relationship with his family, and Caroline Kennedy is still very much private and likes to keep everything kind of official.
And
as
you
far
wish
as that
that was
goes.
the case.
Yeah.
Someone else had hands up. Lorraine?
Hi. Does the presidential library also keep the personal things? I really don't think I need a mic. What? What? Oh. Hi. Does the... Okay. Does the presidential library also keep personal things of his and family things, or is it more, it's everything?
Yeah, and it's, as far as the personal things go, a lot of it depends on what the family wants to donate. JFK Library is lucky to have a great deal of personal things. They have his golf cart, which was on display a few years ago during the summer. They have his pants, sunglasses, a cigarette lighter. He was president of the smoking club at Harvard, and he enjoyed a cigar. That's one thing that they don't really like to talk about, but yeah, a great deal of things, and a great deal of the First Lady's things also. A lot of her dresses, jewelry, yeah, family pictures, and there's a lot of great stuff that has never been on display, and I don't have a say in it, but it would be wonderful if more things kind of like that went on display, because that's what the people really respond to.
Linda?
Thank you. So I heard what you said about the dates in terms of the Presidential Records Act, and then also you've been emphasizing a bit the family preference or the family role. So Chappaquiddick is coming out soon as a movie, and I'm interested in researchers, family members, kind of any connections that you saw through the library during the development of that screenplay and development of the film.
Well, any research would have gone through our research department, which I was not a part of. We were separated by 3 floors. And we do have all of Senator Ted Kennedy's papers, but they're not processed yet, so they're not open to the public for research. So as far as I know, there wasn't much research done about Chappaquiddick, but I can't really speak much on that.
And that was kind of why you had said, when I had asked, there's so many conspiracy theories surrounding JFK because of his assassination, and what percentage of JFK researchers were associated with investigating these theories, and what do you do with irritating customers, and is there one you could illustrate for us? And did you say that you didn't deal with them?
Yeah, I was lucky enough not to have to worry about them. But speaking with folks in the reference department, you know, they were there, and they would come in, they would call. The reference staff just kind of wouldn't answer the phone, and just not because if they knew somebody was a conspiracy theorist, just as a good general practice, because you didn't really know what was going to be on the other end. So they would, let it go to voicemail, see what it was. They would have regulars who would call about the same thing. We would also have people with, that dealt with mental health issues that thought that they were actually a member of the family. This one woman got into a staff event, and she thought that she was Caroline Kennedy, and even emailed pictures of her photoshopped in. So you would just have to kind of deal with that, and you just listen to them, what they have to say, and say thank you, and try to remove yourself. So,
Was there a hand I missed over here? I think there, yeah. With the glare, you have to excuse me.
So it's often an issue in the archival profession that donor relations are very important, and you often have a variety of provisions in deeds of gift if they survived, and different depository agreements. And I imagine you probably didn't have to do a ton of speaking with the donors, but I'm wondering how granularly the preferred narrative was enforced, and how different donor agreements might have influenced what made it online, and how that stuff was interpreted.
Yeah, I didn't have to deal with accessions or with donor relations or getting deeds of gift. I know that is handled through the National Archives legal department. And donors have, they can say that I'm donating these, but I want this particular section to be closed for 30 years, and we abide. We don't put it online. But there, as with any place, there's issues, and they're still trying to get the Robert F. Kennedy papers, which they've been working on for many years. Many years.
Where are they?
They're in the library. It's courtesy storage right now.
The attic. It's the attic.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the most well, you may not know this, but what do you, I'm sure you have internet traffic details and you have checkout details. Like, what are the most frequently requested item in the whole archives? Is it the Warren Report, the Zapruder videos? Is it correspondence?
Well, the Warren Report, the Zapruder video we don't have. The National Archives in Washington, D.C. actually owns, they have an assassination unit that has all of that stuff. I forget the exact name for it, but it's, and they're the ones who, I think last year, or in October, released a whole bunch of records related to the assassination. It was through them. They're accessible on the library's website, but the library got them from the National Archives. So really anything related to the assassination like that, it's not there. As far as the most requested item or document, I don't know. They don't really go down that level. I can tell you some of the most frequently requested collections are the ones that we chose to digitize first. So that's the President's Office files, which were kept by Evelyn Lincoln, President Kennedy's secretary, and the National Security files. Those are the two most requested collections, and those are also the two that we digitized first.
Are most of your researchers academics or politicians or think tanks, or do you have a sense? Or
I think a lot of them are researchers who go on to write books about the Kennedys. We get a lot of students, a lot of people writing their thesis papers, a lot of other college students on assignment. We try to do groups of high school students to introduce them to primary resources. But for the most part, it's academics and people writing books.
Anyone have any questions? Okay. So I understand that JFK visited Ohio University in 1959. I did not know that, but I found that out from you. What can you tell us about this visit, and what is the visit? How did that transpire? What does it tell us about his character? And
Well, he didn't really officially kick off his presidential campaign until 1960, but he did do some stops before that in 1959, and including a trip through Ohio, which was where he stopped in Athens in September. He really liked being out and campaigning and being among the people and meeting them and shaking hands. Jacqueline Kennedy was not a fan of that so much, but she did it. But he really liked doing it, and it's one of the things that eventually kind of led to his assassination, because he insisted on keeping the roof off of the car that day in Dallas, because he wanted to be able to interact and see the people.
So it was a campaign, sort of a campaign visit.
Yeah,
then.
campaign visit.
I mean, and how long was he here? Do we know?
I think just an evening. He was here for a Democratic dinner, and then he did a speech in front of the Student Center afterwards.
In front of the old Baker
Yeah.
Center. And I know this is kind of this is too much of a repeat. If you were to write a book patterned on the information you learned then, what narrative thread would you follow? You said personal life is what you would like to see more of, but I don't know if that covers a particular thread that you think would be of interest.
I think just who he was as an individual, as a person. You just kind of think of him as President Kennedy as this larger than life figure and a bit of a cad, and but he was really great and had interesting characteristics that I don't think people really, it's just not as known as some of his bigger self.
Political public self. Did you, and this person over here asked about donors and everything. I'm sorry I don't know your name. You're not one of my students, but have you ever had interactions with any of the Kennedy family yourself? I mean, is that something that, I would imagine that the staff is pretty pretty small and tight at a presidential library. I could be wrong.
We have the whole building has a few different departments, including the archives. The archives is the largest department, but we have public services, and we have the foundation. The library's foundation is housed within the building, and they do a lot of fundraising, private fundraising. But I would say it's maybe building-wide, 50 or so people. And when Senator Ted Kennedy was still around, he was at the library quite a bit. I never happened to run into him when I was there, but I have met Caroline a few times and her husband, Ed Schlossberg. It's gonna sound weird, but I was lucky enough to be working at the library when Senator Kennedy passed. And I say lucky because I was able to really see what the family and what the senator meant to the citizen, to Massachusetts and to Boston, and to so many other people. I was there the whole time. They had him in in our big ballroom. They kind of had him there for a few days so people could come by and pay their respects, and I was there every day, and it was just really amazing to see how he affected so many people, because he had been around for so long. And everybody I talked to, tears streaming down their face. We loved him so much, and Chappaquiddick aside, it was really great. It was really great to be a part of that.
I would think so.
Yeah.
And the family has still got such a huge sort of hold on the imagination and the sort of identity of Boston.
And now we have Senator Joseph Kennedy III, who just did the response to the State of the Union the other night. I've met him also. He's quite wonderful. So he's an up and comer. He's gonna go far, I think. Next generation of Kennedys.
It's really interesting. Any other questions before we move on to talking about National Archive? I mean, the bank, or do you have some other things? You have some pictures of
It's
it.
not Kennedy related, but I have to say my favorite moment from working there was when I got to meet President Obama. He was, last May, he was awarded the Profile and Courage Awards by the library, and he insisted on taking a staff photo, so that was probably my favorite moment, actually.
Is it blown up over your bed?
No, because I don't, it's a group photo, so it's not just me and him.
So cool. But still.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe some other illustrious folks in the crowd have that personal photo. I sure don't. So can you tell us a little bit about your career shift from the JFK Library to your current job at the Federal Reserve Bank? I mean, I know you're new at it, but what's similar or different? I mean, when I heard Reserve Bank, my first question was, what does a bank archive? And so that's several questions. Maybe we can start with, tell us about why the shift and what you're learning, and then what the heck does a Reserve Bank archive, since ignorant people like me don't have any idea.
Well, I've been at the library for 10 years, and I had a federal government position, which can be great because you'll have a job forever, but it can also be very limiting in that there's not a lot of room to grow. So I had kind of reached that limit, and I was ready to challenge myself professionally and to grow professionally. And moving on to the Federal Reserve Bank, where I'm the only archivist for that bank, it's really opened up new experiences for me. It's challenged me more. I'm doing other areas that I didn't have the chance to do at the library, such as conducting oral histories with people who are retiring, who led important programs. So what I do at the Federal Reserve Bank, what we archive is mostly records related to the bank and to the building, to certain projects that have come out of the Boston branch. It's not, the bank that you think of on the corner. It's the central bank for the United States. So we're in charge of monetary policy, supervision and regulation, and there's one other main aspect, and I can't remember what it is. So whenever they set the interest rates, the Federal Reserve Banks are responsible for that. They actually just had a meeting, I think earlier this week or last week, where they decided to, I think, raise the interest rates a little bit. So I'm responsible for any big project that comes out of my bank, to kind of keep all of the papers related to that, and any pictures or digital materials.
And this goes back hundreds of years then, because
Well, the Federal Reserve System has been around since 1914, so it doesn't go back as far as I thought. And then the archives has really only been around for about 10 years. So in a lot of ways, there wasn't much there when I came on, and I'm kind of starting from ground zero and building it from nothing, really. So it's quite challenging. It's good professional growth.
I would think so. Being a sole person on the job, you have
Yeah.
lots of different kinds of career tasks. Any questions from any of you? I didn't know anything about Federal Reserve Bank archive work.
I'm still learning about the bank and the system. There's so many financial terms.
I figured
And I work with a bunch of economists. I don't know what they talk about.
be your new growth, right?
Yeah.
Soon they'll have you get an MBA to.
Oh, sorry.
So do you have any specific advice for students who'd like to pursue careers like you have pursued in the archives field? We've already talked about internships, so there may be nothing new, but.
I can't stress internships enough. Everybody that I know, and I know it was a class requirement at Simmons, but everybody I know did an internship. And even when hiring interns, we did pay them, which you don't always get paid. But even hiring interns, the more experience they had, the likelier we were to select them. And that's just because we're busy. We can't teach you how to do something, but we will help you learn how to do it. Like, we want you to get the basics in your classes, and then apply those methods out in the field. So internships, experience, that's what I would stress.
Are there internships that you know of available for students who are in a bachelor's degree program who might have an interest in putting their feet into the library field before making a determination about graduate school?
I think you could just probably contact any archives.
That would be you?
Yeah.
Well, now I can talk about.
Oh, yeah.
I can talk a little bit about what's available in Ohio. I know that there's an undergraduate history paid internship for the summer at Dawes Arboretum. Right now, they're advertising that will close at the end of February. I know Ohio History Connection, which is the state archives, among other things, in Columbus, always has internships. They're usually not paid. They also run an AmeriCorps program that places interns in history organizations around the state. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame usually takes some interns. Most large history type cultural heritage organizations will take some undergraduates. Though when you look at advertisements for interns, most of the time they're for graduate students, but usually there are places that will take undergrads, including our library, our archives, our digital initiatives. We have representatives right here, right now.
I assume you're one of them?
Yes.
Okay. Kelly has brought some slides to show, and I didn't know if there'd be any questions associated. It's not a lot of images, but some were from the JFK visit, and some of them were some of the artifacts. So I think rather than like squishing it in, we should let her show those, and then if we have questions afterwards, it'd be easier to ask them than not have time. So if we want to start those up, I don't know how it's all set up, so.
So this I found in the, I believe in the 1960 campaign files. It is, I know the text is a little hard to read, I'm sorry about that, but it's JFK's schedule for his 4-day tour of Ohio in September. And you can see under September 18th, which is the second section from the bottom, he's in Athens. At 6:30, he's giving an address at a Democratic dinner at the Student Center, and then at 8:30, he's addressing a student rally. And the next slide shows, there's a slide further down that shows the speeches that he gave, the titles, but I don't have copies of the exact speeches. I tried to find them. And then this letter, I know it's hard to read, but it's from an attorney in Athens, and he's talking about JFK's visit, where the dinner starts at 6:30, and handshaking of 400 to 500 people, and the student rally is scheduled at 9. And then he's taking the group back to Parkersburg, and they're staying at the Athens Motel. I think it's on the way.
Only the best.
But this is also from the 1960 campaign files. And this man, William Lavelle, he
still practices here, I think.
Oh, really?
Is he retired? But he's still in the community. Is it his son?
Well, he has a lot of letters in the 1960 campaign files.
We should have invited him to show up today.
Yeah. So this is a letter from somebody who is in the Peace Corps. He's writing to Ralph Dungan, who was a special assistant to the president. He was one of many special assistants to JFK. And he's just, saying, my friend took some photos of JFK when he was at Athens, if you want to see them. And at the top it says Mrs. L for president. Mrs. L is Mrs. Lincoln. So here's one of the photos. And these were taken just by somebody who was at the event on a 35 millimeter film. I tried to find other pictures, but we didn't have any. And I wish the background was a little clearer so we could really see. So this is the list of speeches that he gave around Ohio in September of 1959. And the one for Ohio University, he gave the challenge to our colleges, and then he gave a speech about Africa. And we actually have those speeches, but they're not digitized yet, so I couldn't bring them. And then this is actually the intro to the speech he gave at the Democratic dinner. A lot of his speeches, especially the campaign speeches, he annotated himself, and he would make edits, and those are really great to look at if you have some time to kind of read through all. There's so many of them, and they're in the 1960, I think some are in 1960 campaign files, but the majority are in his Senate files, most of his Senate speeches are digitized. He had terrible handwriting, which you'll see. So this was sent by Larry Spiegel, the editor of the Mock Democratic Convention magazine. He's saying Ohio University will hold its first mock political convention. The students did a mock election, I think it's this one or maybe a different letter, where it was overwhelmingly Democratic. And here is, JFK loved to doodle, and he doodled on a lot of stuff, and during almost every meeting. There's a whole section of doodles in JFK's personal papers, which are all digitized. He frequently doodled sailboats, and he would do, I don't have it in here, but he would do squares, kind of like interlocking down. He would also repeat words, so I think in this one, he wrote purpose, preparation. This one doesn't have too much repetition, but there's one where it'll just be like, 3 words just repeated. It's whatever they were talking about in the meeting. This, I think, was actually during one of the Cuban Missile Crisis meetings. This is a handwritten note. This is what I was talking about earlier, the personal side of him. This is written on the back of a weekend reading material list that he was given. This is in the National Security Files. And this is a note he wrote to Jackie. I'm sorry, Mrs. Kennedy. And it says, Dave, Kenny, Ted, Taz, McHugh, Evelyn, Bob, Dean, and me are doing nothing but taking care of Sardar. Don't worry, all love, JFK. And Sardar was a horse that the president of Pakistan gifted to the First Lady. And she loved horses. So a gift of a horse was, she loved Sardar. And Dave is Dave Powers. Kenny is Kenny O'Donnell. Ted is Ted Sorensen. Taz is Tazwell Shepard. Dean is Dean Rusk. He was the Secretary of State at the time. McHugh is Godfrey McHugh. Evelyn Lincoln. Bob, I believe he's referring to his brother. Dean, oh, I already said Dean. So this is just a little note he jotted off to Jackie, and I don't know, I just thought it was really touching. So this is the voting rights map that I talked about earlier. And I don't remember what all of the color coding means. There is a blog post written by one of our reference archivists that talks about this more in detail, which should be either on our website or it's Googleable. But it's just really interesting to see that this, it's just like a piece of history. Like this was hanging on his wall while all of this was happening, and now we can see it. And this has been restored. It was recently sent off for restoration to the New England Document Conservation Center, NEDCC. This is one of my favorites, and English majors, you should like it too. It's Kurt Vonnegut volunteering his services to work on on the president's campaign. He says that on occasion I write pretty well. This is probably one of my favorite items in the whole library. But at the time he had only written 2 novels, and he mostly did freelance work, and he lived on the Cape. So this was taken at one of the America's Cup races in Newport. You can see JFK in the blazer with the sunglasses talking, I don't know who he's talking to, but this gentleman right here on the right, yes, it's John Kerry. Occasionally, well-known people will pop up in old photos. Some of our photo catalogers discovered a picture of Nancy Pelosi as a teenager because her father was in politics and visited the White House. And then when they realized it was Nancy Pelosi, they were like, oh my God, it's Nancy Pelosi. This is one of my favorite pictures. She's just so elegant. And I love his socks. They're kind of, you know, just gym socks. And then this is one of my other favorites. It's, you know, a really sweet picture with him and Caroline. It's just kind of an intimate moment. And this was taken, I believe, on the Honey Fits, when they were just not being the first family. And that's it. There's so many more items in the digital archives that it was hard to kind of pick. But those are just a few related to Athens and a few of my personal favorites.
Where might someone in this room who had an interest, would you just type in at Google JFK Presidential Library Archives? Because maybe some of us will want to dig around there.
It's jfklibrary.org or .gov. You can Google JFK Library and it'll show up. It should be no, it might be .org actually. The foundation runs the website, so I think it's .org. And then right on the main page, there's a little picture that says, I believe it says search the digital archives, and you can go in there and you can search by digitized collection. You can search all the collections. You can search by subject term. You can search by name. There's a lot of ways to search and a lot of information in there and a lot of exploring to do. It's great. Professionally, it's probably the thing I'm most proud of is working on this digital archives. It was many years to get it up online, and it was the first of its kind in the presidential library system, and it still kind of, I think, beats all of the other presidential libraries in terms of content. So,
Well, that's wonderful.
yeah.
We're out of time, but we have a gap here of 15 minutes before those of us who are going to the Career Networking Fair are heading that way. So if you have a question, you're welcome to come up and just ask it personally. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.